Welcome to the Audacity to Be Happy podcast. I am your host, Michelle Morano-Burke, and today we are having the audacity to be happy about Caroline's story. Today I will be interviewing my dear friend, Caroline Tripp, who has been a lifelong friend. I'm going to briefly discuss some of her accomplishments and accolades so that we can understand a little bit about the woman behind the story. In addition to a lengthy, successful career in sales, Caroline is the owner of Bella Vita Doula Services and provides compassionate birth, postpartum, and bereavement companionship. She has extensive training in fertility, birth, postpartum support through Bibomia, as well as Stillbirth Day. Alongside her professional experience, Caroline draws on her life experience as a wife, mother, and bereaved parent. She supports families suffering from loss. As a family support chair for Star Legacy Foundation, the Virginia chapter, Caroline has also studied the effects of trauma on bereaved parents. To continue her mission of ministering to those who need it most, Caroline is working towards becoming a certified trauma-informed yoga teacher and mental health coach. Let's join Caroline in Williamsburg, Virginia, now, as she shares her wisdom in the realm of grief support and helping those who experienced any kind of perinatal loss. Welcome, Caroline.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It is such a pleasure to be here this evening with you.
This is one of the most sensitive stories I've ever had the privilege, and it is a privilege to know this story personally from my dear friend. It is not an easy story to tell. And so I'd like us all to send good vibes right now to Caroline. I know that you're going to be watching this as a recording, but just know that my producer, me, and anybody else that's present with us right now are just sending Caroline the best vibes ever, because it is brave, bold, and audacious to tell this story in hopes of helping others through this process of healing and finding your audacious happiness again after experiencing such traumatic loss. So would you mind taking us to that day, Caroline?
Well, first, let me say, I just want to thank the Audacity to Be Happy community for allowing me to be here today to share my story. Part of my story is being one in 4 women that lose a child, whether that is an experience that has happened through miscarriage, stillbirth, infant loss, and even losses past then, right? So, and in the past, this topic has been something that is very much a taboo to talk about. And I'm happy to have the opportunity to talk about a 15-year journey that I have experienced. And it has been filled with a lot of sadness and misunderstanding, shame, guilt. There's so many emotions that surround it. But my story goes back to 2007. I was practically a newlywed, and my husband and I at the time had a 3-month-old son. And on the day that my loss happened, or the beginning of my loss happened, it was a day that I wasn't supposed to be at work. And so my son was 3 months old. His name is Neil. And it was a Thursday, and I was at home, and I was supposed to be spending a most wonderful day just reeling in the newness of being a new mom and having snuggles on the couch and loving my son. And during that time, I had a job as a manager in a retail store. I worked for Ann Taylor. And it just so happened that my colleague, who was supposed to be working that day, called me in the morning, and she said she had gotten in a car accident. She couldn't come to the store, and she asked me just to go over there just to get it opened and get things up and running for the day. So I obliged. My husband at the time, he worked nights, so he had the opportunity just to stay home with the baby. I didn't think anything of it. I went to work. I did what I would normally do, help someone who was in need, fulfill my obligation as a manager of a store, and just uphold all of the things that I felt needed to be done that day. And I didn't think it was a big deal. I thought that she would be in by 10, 11 o'clock in the afternoon. And then I would have the opportunity to be able to go back home to my family. That didn't happen. Around 2:30 that day, I was still working. The phone rang, and it was my husband, Neil. And it was not unlike him to call me during the day at work. He would call me every day that I was working, and he would say, guess what? I kissed the baby 50 more times than you did today, because he was just such a proud father. And it was something that was so foolish, but I looked forward to it every single time I was at work, and it would just cheer me up that this wonderful dad was taking care of my beautiful little boy. But that day was different. When I answered that phone, he said, Caroline, where are you? And I said, I'm still at work. My colleague hasn't showed up. He said, you lock up that store and you meet me at the hospital. And I was like, why? Like, what is going on? Meet me at the hospital. Just don't ask questions. It's the baby. Meet me at the hospital. So at that point in time, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to think. So I gathered up my things. I got everybody out of that store, locked it up, didn't worry about cash registers or anything. And when I got to the hospital, it had turned out that my baby boy was unconscious. And I didn't know what was happening at that point in time. All I knew that I was in the waiting room and doctors were coming to me and they were having me sign paperwork. And there was just a lot of scuttlebutt. And at the time, we weren't even allowed to be in the emergency room where the baby was. Well, it turns out on that particular day, when I wasn't home, my husband was giving the baby a bath, and he was 3 months old, but he was a big baby. He was about 14 pounds. And while he was giving him a bath, he flipped over and he hit his head on the faucet. So at that point in time, he got him out of the bathtub, took care of him. Everything seemed to be fine. The baby was still, he was his happy old self. Well, 2 hours later, he was swinging in his swing, and my husband had gone into the other room to do some work. When he came back in, my son was slumped over. And he wasn't slumped over sleeping, he was slumped over unconscious. And at that point in time, he called 911, and then that's when I had gotten the phone call. So when I had gotten the phone call and he was asking me to come to the hospital, EMTs were at the house and they were already working on my son. So when I first saw him, he was intubated and he was unconscious. And basically there was really nothing that they could do for him. He was still alive. And we live in Williamsburg, Virginia. So Williamsburg is certainly not the center of medical emergencies for children. And so my son needed to be airlifted to a hospital, CHKD in Norfolk, Virginia. And that is where I stayed for 2 days. And the unfortunate part of all of this is because an accident happened in the house, my husband was not allowed to be with me. So I was alone. I was unaware of what was going on. All I knew was that my child was in the PICU and his eyes were closed. and he was closed. His eyes were closed. He was still living, but just in an unconscious state. And at that point in time, what they try to do is keep the child alive because he had had some blood that had pooled on his head. And that really didn't dissipate. So the anticipation was that it would, and he would recover. But over the course of 3 days, he didn't. I was still in the hospital that whole time. My parents had just been with us in Virginia the weekend before because my son was baptized, and they had to come back down. So imagine having to tell the grandparents, and I didn't even do that. I was totally unaware or numb at that point in time. I could not make any decisions. I could not have conversations with people. I was silent. So my doctor called my parents. They came down from New York City. My doctor called my best friend from Seattle. She got on an airplane, and within 8 hours, she was with me. And these people were making decisions for me. So we got to the hospital on a Thursday. By Saturday morning, we had to make a decision as to what to do. So it was decided that we would take him off of life support. But it was also decided that he would be an organ donor. And this wonderful conversation that proceeded about organ donation. And I spoke with my dad, and he told me he thought it would be a great idea, and I thought it would be a wonderful idea. And the only thing we did not donate was his eyes. And that's because my beautiful boy had big brown eyes. And my dad said they looked just like mine. So his legacy is that he was able to help 3 families by donating his heart and his lungs and his kidneys. And I mean, I can look at that today and say just what a beautiful gift he was able to give others, even though he didn't last very long. 94 days. I had 94 days with my son. But I also had the blessing of 9 months of being able to carry him and to mother him. And so throughout this experience, there's just so much. The story is so big, and there's so many more details that come along with it. But that is basically what happened to me. I walked out the door one day thinking that this was any other day.